live with another edition of the Cheap Heat Productions Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling, and tonight we have a very special guest, a guest who truly made a mark in what many refer to as the golden era of professional wrestling, be it in NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions, WWF, and several points there in between. Mr. Tommy Angel. We're very pleased to have him on the show. But before we get into our questions for Tommy, I'd like to say hello to the host, the man of the channel, Mr. Cheap Heat, Maurice. How are you tonight, sir?
Great. Thanks very much, Jack. As I always turn to the guest end, Tommy, and say this podcast is based in Ireland, but we run from Canada because the internet is so bad over here.
It's a multinational tag team.
Yes, sir.
Exactly.
Most definitely. Wanted to start off by asking you. A lot of the fans are interested in how an individual gets into the wrestling business. By two-part question: asking you if you were a fan of the business growing up, and if so, what areas, and if you could talk a little bit after that about your training under the great Nelson Royal and Gene Anderson.
Sure. Growing up, I didn't really know much about it. I remember seeing Hulk Hogan when he first came on the scene, and I knew it was the WWF, but I thought that looks pretty cool. But I didn't really pay attention until I got in the military. I was in the United States Army from 1981 to 1985 in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, with the 82nd Airborne Division's paratroopers, the guys that like to jump out of airplanes. And on the weekends, we'd watch TV, and I was always working out. Coming out of high school, I was about 200 pounds, but I started training and got up a little bit heavier. But there were some guys in my barracks that were just monsters. They're like, man, you guys, how do you get that big? And they finally enlightened me it was steroids. So I went from that point to about 260 pounds, but it was to the point where I couldn't barely fit in a parachute harness to jump out. So I was going to, they were always constantly making me try to diet, go to certain chow halls, eat dietary meals, and you just go in and eat. You go out that door, you go to the next building, eat that chow hall. So I'd eat 2 or 3 meals at a time, and really enjoyed getting big. But on the weekends, we started watching world-class wrestling. Kerry Von Erich specifically was the guy that really, I was like, man, I want to be just like that guy. That is cool. Got hair and chicks, and he's big. And so I got to the end of my 4 years there. I had a choice to make, and I was looking at Warrant Officer School, which is for helicopter pilot training. But they were saying you're going to have to drop some weight if you want to, become a pilot. And that was kind of discouraging. And I thought, well, I don't know how to get into wrestling, but that seems like you'd have a lot more fun. So I got out of the military, and while I was there at Fort Bragg is Fayetteville, North Carolina. The Cumberland County Arena there is where the NWA did a lot of shows. So we go down and start harassing the boys, yelling at them, and trying to get their attention. And on the babyface side, a couple times Gene Ligon and Don Kernoodle were there, and we kept badgering him. How can you get in the business, man? That looks like fun. He goes, I could tell by your haircuts you guys are in the military here. They're trying to discourage us. You'll never make it. I'm like, whatever. Let me prove myself. And they finally had, I guess the timing was perfect because Gene Ligon said in a couple of months in Mooresville, North Carolina, they're going to open up a school. And he gave us the number to call. We just kept calling. And finally, they said the date, I want to say it was around July of that year in 86, maybe a little earlier. And they said, come up, try out. So we drove, me and a buddy of mine from Fayetteville drove into Mooresville to Nelson's camp. His property was right there. He had a home and a ranch, and he had steers and horses and all kinds of stuff. So we meet at the store. We go down this dirt road, and there's probably like 25 of us. He's like, all right, here we go. We're trying out for professional wrestling. We don't need any horse around. Pay attention. This is very serious. Yeah, I think it was like $350 we had to pay, non-refundable, to try out. So they made us run around the field, up and down these hills, doing wind sprints, carrying guys on your back, fireman carry. And I just got out of the military and basically shaped my life, and it was hot, and all the guys around me were sucking wind, and I was smiling, and I'm like, sissies. And then from that point, it was probably about an hour or so in the field. They brought us into this old barn, and had a ring set up. So we get in the ring with Italian Stallion. You guys probably know that name. Mm-hmm. He was there helping Nelson and Gene as far as getting in the ring to see what kind of athletic ability, wrestling skills we had. I never wrestled in high school, but I did grow up taking judo, and it's similar, using your opponent's weight against them. So between being really strong and knowing judo, Stallion couldn't pin me. He was getting pissed off. Come on, shoving me and stuff. It was fun. But then after that, Gene said, all right, everybody over there. And him and Nelson were going to decide who made that class. And I think it was like 8 of us that made it. And the rest of them had told them to go home. And then like in a couple of weeks after that, we started training Friday nights and Saturdays for about 4 months with Gene. And Gene couldn't get in the ring, but Nelson could. But just having the vantage point of a heel and a babyface training us, looking back, that was the best schooling you could have got, so you learn both sides of the business for their perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Maurice?
You mentioned there, Tommy, about steroids in the business. Was that something that you felt that was needed to get into the wrestling business? Would you have made it into the wrestling business without taking steroids?
I don't think so, but I know the NWA was they were at the point where they were, a lot of the guys didn't, but I was watching WWF and World Class Wrestling. I thought, man, the guys that look successful look like they're in good shape. No one talked about it. The guys did it and some guys didn't, but I knew I felt like that gave me a better advantage. And it truly did, and it also helped in my conditioning, because when I started working more regularly, you get banged up on the road, and your recovery time's a little faster.
When you
did
first
it ever change over the years? Sorry there. I think there's a little delay there. Did it ever change over the years, like working through the companies? Were they ever did you ever get to a point where they were harsh? And I know the WWF steroid trial came up, but before that even, was it kind of loose enough through all the companies?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think some states, when we had to get those athletic licenses, each state, sometimes some states, I can't remember which ones, we have to take a drug, like a urine test, just to see if you're pot or cocaine or something like that. But it was very rare. I mean, there was guys in the locker room giving themselves shots, and it was right around the same time I was working for the WWF when all that stuff was going on with Hogan and Spivey and Doctor that was involved in all that, and so it was open that people knew about it. And it's like when I got to WWF, there was a couple guys that were actually injecting themselves. I'm like, this is crazy. But in the NWA, when I first got there was guys doing cocaine in the locker room. So you just has like a whole different perspective coming from the military, where you don't mess with it. I mean, I wasn't naive, but he just wasn't out in the open so much. I was like, this is crazy.
How did you first get booked for the NWA, and can you talk a little bit about your experience working those famous WTBS shots from Techwood Drive Studios? I believe your first match on TV was against the Rock and Roll Express, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that first taping was first. I had Baron von Raschke first in a singles match, and then the second hour of that taping was with the Rock and Roll Express. Well, that was all in one day. Obviously, they shoot things in the can. Gene and Nelson's school was a creation of Crockett Promotions. Gene was actually an employee of the NWA, and their TV ratings weren't doing that well during that time frame, and they just realized that top guys are just smashing jobbers. They come out, bury them, and people weren't tuning in because that was interesting. And they'd have, I think, every show they'd have one main event or semi-main event, mid-card guys going at it just to draw some interest. But outside of that, so they wanted to create a school that would train guys that were better at competition in the ring, still doing jobs, putting guys over, but making it look like there's a chance that these young guys were coming in. And I think they called us young lions. So that was the intent from the NWA itself, Crockett Promotions. So Nelson and Gene, and it was easy because they just coordinated. Gene was in the office. He said, all right, here's a TV tape, and I'll give you the guys I think are ready. And thankfully, I was in the first wave. And because after we finished at school, it was literally 4 or 5 weeks we were on television. It was crazy. So I'm telling my friends at the base, I was in the Army, I'm going to be on TV. They're like, you're a liar. So I watched the Superstation, brother, 605 and 705. And so it was a lot of fun. I mean, that was, like you said, the greatest era. I mean, even that pipe and drape studio at Techwood Drive, they'd have 40, 50 people in there, and they didn't have any problem getting excited because they knew when it was live that they're going to be on TV because it was the hard camera right where Tony Schiavone was. There was the ring, and then the people are all around it, and it wasn't hard to pan the crowd, so they were very involved, very excited. So it just made for good programming.
Yeah, in 1987, Tommy, you fought Lex Luger in the NWA. What was Lex like to work with? You hear contrasting kind of reports about him all the time.
He was, he was snug, but thankfully Nelson's ring was Mooresville, just right outside of Charlotte, and the NWA office was right up on South Boulevard, was off South Boulevard, and which was like a, I don't know, 20-minute ride, but there was a time when they were getting ready for the Baltimore Cup, and Luger was going to fight Flair. So Nelson, I lived with Nelson on that ranch after I started working on television, so we could continue training. And he said, Lex is coming up on this day and this day, work out with Flair, get ready for Baltimore Cup. I just want to work on a couple of moves. And the thing he was struggling with was doing a sunset flip from outside the ring into the ring over Flair. And he was almost laying on his head every time. And I can't remember who came from the office with him, but Gene and Nelson were there, and they're like, "Son, you're doing it wrong." And so I demonstrated for him, go over, just leap over, and he finally got it. And after they left, we were doing all kinds of different things, but it was a great experience to be around Rick and Lex, because I never, just going to television, you're sitting in the same room, you walk past them, but just having conversations with them, and they both left in their Mercedes, and Nelson said, "You see that, son? You're showing a man how to do a move, and he's driving a Mercedes." I'm like, "Hey, one day I'm going to have one, yeah." But so I know at that point he already knew who I was, and he knew I had the ability to work. So when I got on television, he's like, we knew our role. We were there to make those guys look good, and so he took care of me. But there were television matches back then with the main stars. They were pushing probably 2 or 3 minutes long, but just to go out there and look like we were going to try to beat him, but. He put you in that rack, but every once in a while he'd rib you and squeeze you. You're like, "Stop! Oh, I'm selling! Stop!" But it was all fun.
That's tremendous. You worked the Midnight Express a number of times, who had many memorable matches on TBS. Just wanted to get your impression of, or your memories of that, given, we've heard various stories about how smooth the late great Bobby Eaton was, and how good they were to work with with the young guys. Was that your experience too?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, I'd worked him when Dennis Condrey was still a member of the Midnight Express, and then Stan came in, but Bobby was so fluid, so light, so generous. I mean, he could jump off the top rope, and you wouldn't even feel him. He's just a humble, nice guy. And but Jim Cornette, if I had royalties, I'd give him to him. He made up some goofy song. One of the first matches I had, started singing in every TV tape, and "Tommy Angel." In every place I worked, people would sing that. And I was like, he put me on the grid, so to speak, and so that helped me out, gave me a push, But he'd always lay that tennis racket in there nice and stiff, but I didn't care. But they were so easy to work with. They'd give you a lot of stuff too, because they trusted you. And I think that's, as Nelson's boys is what we were called, or Gene's boys. A lot of those older guys loved Gene Anderson as well, but they knew we were trained, and they'd give us opportunities as they got more and more respect and trust in us. They gave us a little bit more. So over the first matches we had, I can almost pinpoint and say that's when I wasn't, I was really green, and then. As time went on, they gave us more stuff, and it was a good feeling, because that's the whole thing. Nelson and Gene always told us, if you hurt somebody, they're not going to book you. You're there to help them make a good living. That's your role, and so we embraced it. We were professional, and we knew our role.
Yeah, we were looking through the match database, and the timing kind of aligns, but I don't think you got to fight this man, the Ultimate Warrior. But what was he like, or did you have any interactions with him in your time in WWF?
Yeah, I didn't work him, but a lot of my friends did, and they said he was stiff. He'd get all geeked up in the ring and blown up just from shaking the ropes and stuff. And when he'd hit you with that clothesline. One of my buddies, Ellie Stevens, he didn't even know what town he was in after he got hit. And we thought he was ribbing us. And I was like, dude, after a while, I told my buddies, I said, I think he got a concussion or something. That was back before concussions were a big deal, but he was intense. But he's also a licensed chiropractor. He'd go up, like one time I said, brother, I hate to bother you, but I was calling him sir. I said, he said, "Don't call me sir." I said, I heard you're a chiropractor. Can you help me adjust my neck? Yeah, sit down right there, brother. So he was really good.
Speaking of stiff, you wrestled the Road Warriors on television a number of times, and we've heard, from various people especially when they were green, coming off, their initial run in Georgia, that they were really, really hard to work with, and guys would pass out when they saw their name at the back. I'm just wondering what your experience was like with the late great Hawk and Animal.
They were great with us. I mean, they both loved Gene Anderson. Gene was at the TVs, and they'd sit down and they'd be sitting there talking to him about the old days and stuff like that. So they respected him, and they knew that we were capable. And I was horrified just watching them, because you hear that Iron Man song and you and they never took it on me, thank God. It's, "We like you, Angel. We're not going to take it on you." I said, "Thank you, Jesus." But they were literally, they looked like they would hurt you. But in my experience, in the matches I had with them, they were just as snug as everybody else. They just looked like they were killing you. I'm sure they got stiff on some people on purpose, but they never did that to me. So when I go out there, I was just trying to laugh, because they'd be saying stuff under their breath. "Hey, you little pipsqueak."
Tremendous.
Tommy, what's your proudest moment in the wrestling business, and what is your favorite match that you've ever had?
Probably my experience in the WWF alone, when there was a time when Lanny Poffo got hurt, and they asked me if I was willing to take his place on the tour he was on. It was like 2 weeks they needed to fill, and I was like, the fact that they trusted me enough, an outsider coming in as one of the Nelson's boys, that's a story in and of itself, how Vince got us away from the WCW. But to know that they trusted me enough to give me the work and go out there and do these house shows and some other TVs. But I was working Iron Mike Sharp and Coco Beware, and I was flying around with Rude, Henning, and Boss Man. And I think the best match TV-wise was with Kurt Hennig. He gave me a lot. He was a good friend, and he said, "Kid, you just keep trying. I know you're an underneath guy, but I'm gonna let you do a few things, and let the office see that you can work." And so it was a television match. I want to say it was in Connecticut, but it's on YouTube. But even Bobby gave him a heat after that. Said, "Why'd you give that kid so much?" He goes, "Dude, someone gave me that chance. Leave him alone. Leave him alone." But that was probably the best match on television I had. I had a lot of house shows too, but the fact it was on television, people could see that I could work.
Yeah.
You touched on Rick Flair and Lex Luger earlier, but you also worked. I remember these matches distinctly. Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson on television a lot, and Arn as a singles, who on his podcast really mentioned that you were an excellent worker in the ring, and it seemed that they were somewhat competitive when you were working them. Do you have any memories of any of those matches in particular?
Yeah, they were. Arn is first class, and Tully as well. They're all business. The way they conduct themselves, the way they treated people around them, especially Arn. To me, he's one of the smartest guys in the business. He does his business. He wasn't one of the guys that was out in bars after hours when everybody was. So he'd work with us. So when they got their first match in WWF, when they went up there as the Brainbusters, we saw him, because we had left to go work for McMahon. He somehow got a hold of Nelson and Gene and said, "Look, I noticed your guys' talent. We'd like to get him up in some TV." And Nelson and Gene approached us and said, "Look, you have an opportunity at WWF, but if you go, you may burn that bridge in the NWA WCW." I said, "That's what I want. That's where I want to be, is WWF." And going up there and working out with them, the first day we got up there, we were walking into the building. I know it's kind of veering away from your question, but we all walk in as a group. We always sat together. We always, Nelson always said, mind your P's and Q's, stick together, and just, observe everything. And then we're walking in, I see Vince McMahon, and we kind of like stutter stepped, like, oh man, that's the guy. And he walks up, he's like, hey Tommy, hey David, hey George, hey Larry, and you guys all right? Need anything? I'm like, no, we're all good. And he walked away. I'm like, good Lord, he just talked to us. That's crazy. Because Jim Crockett himself, Jimmy Jr., would never even acknowledge you were standing next to him. I mean, he's just a very quiet man. I'm not disparaging him, but it was just night and day. But going up there and working was just it's like comparing apples and oranges. I don't even know where your question went. I just kind of veered off there on a tangent. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. You were mentioning that Arn was one of the
The Brainbusters, yeah.
And he
So-
did put you over on his podcast as well.
Yeah, they their first match they aligned. The office is smart up there too. They knew that we had worked with them before, but it was a guy named Bob Emery and me worked with him, and Arn came up and Tully specifically said, "We're so thankful that we're working you guys because we're up here against all these other tag teams, competing, the Midnight Rockers, the Rougeaus, there's like 5 or 6 of them." He said, we have to come up here and make a good impression, and we're probably going to steamroll you. I said, that's what we're here for. Let's do this. And made them look good, and they were very appreciative. And then I also had the Undertaker's first television match. So that made me feel good too. They wanted them, I think mostly because my gimmick was Angel, and they're like, Mr. Angel might be flying with the Angels after this match. Just having fun with the name during the TV taping. But that was just the fact when they recognize you enough to trust you to put their new push on television, you're not going to mess it up.
You mentioned Vince there and the way he welcomed you guys to the building that day when you went in for the first time. Is there any other stories about Vince that stand out to you over the years?
As my interactions with him were very, very limited, but he was always cordial, always nice to us. I've heard the stories. I've seen some of the things happen in the back rooms. But we went there to conduct business, do our job and leave. So I wasn't caught up in all that. But he was nothing but first class to us, always.
And what was the main difference, we'll say, between when it got to WCW in the early 1990s and WWF?
Well, the pay obviously was better. They would fly us up there because it was too far to drive, but they had buffets that were set up during the TV tapings. You'd put 4 weeks in the can, so you're there all day long. You're down Techwood Drive, and when they finally moved it to the center stage, if there was a break between your matches between the tapings, we'd send a guy down to the convenience store or something, try to buy some frozen burritos or something, or just pack a lunchbox. And it's like, we get up there, there's food and plenty of waters and juices and stuff to stay hydrated. It was night and day. But the boys are the boys. The locker rooms are exactly the same. They hung out in their little cliques and just fun. But just we got per diem, so we get a hotel room. They flew us. It was just they were very organized. We knew when we were done with our TV tapings, when the next one was scheduled. And you go to a WWF event, TV taping, they'd have 4 tractor trailers out there, all nice and shiny with their logos on it, and it looked like the Barnum and Bailey Circus rolling there. You get an NWA, you'd see like an old used Ryder truck and a bunch of fat guys pulling the ring out, setting it up. So it was a first class operation.
Another individual you worked many times on television that you seem to have pretty good in-ring chemistry with was Sting. Just wanted to get your recollections of that, plus a comment on the fact that he's still been active and he's just winding down next year for AEW.
Yeah, he's just an exceptional human being. I mean, he was dedicated to his craft as far as training, working, and all that. Just a very personable guy. So when you'd sit down and talk to him, they'd always give you the finish. He'd sit down and talk and say, if we go 4 or 5 minutes, you want to try this, or I'm going to try this one move, and but very light, very easy to work with. And you hear that expression a lot in a walk in the park. It was always easy to work with him. And that dude was super athletic. I mean, he could jump 15 feet in the air like a deer. He just had huge legs, but just very, very humble, very nice. And he deserves all the success he has.
Yep. Do you have any memories of working with one Adam Bomb on Monday Night Raw?
Yeah, it was a memory. Yeah, it was quick. He was stiff. That's a big dude. Adam Bomb. I don't recall a whole lot about it other than that I knew it was going to be a squash job, and still fun. But I think it was the picture that you had originally, didn't it? With my hair was already cut. I was starting to lose my hairline was going back, so I cut the mullet off, so it looked like my head was on upside down, and grew a goatee. So there, some places were trying to use me as more of a heel, So not one of my proud
Got the
moments.
photo change, don't worry.
I know, it's good. All good.
A fan is asking, and being Canadian, I have to bring this one up. Was Dino Bravo stiff in the ring when you worked with him?
I would say the first time I did, he was a little snug. He gets all, when you get, some guys get excited, man, they just, but when they were coming through Charlotte, one time, I wasn't working on the show, but they were in Charlotte, and he met one of the girl I was dating at the time, and she was, he was more than smitten with her. That's your girlfriend? That's your girlfriend? He just kept saying it. I said, yeah. And I said, and he part of his gimmick, he slapped. So I told her, I said, slap him as hard as you can in the chest to like it. And he all night long, he's falling around, slap me again, slap me again. So from that point on, when I work him, he was always very, very light because he liked my girlfriend. But he was just, God, he was so strong. I mean, he could literally throw you out of the ring over his head. But it's horrible what happened to him in real life. But he was a great worker to me.
One of the fans here in the chat is mentioning that did Scott Steiner make you bleed in your first match with him?
Yeah, that was they wanted to take a look at him down at Techwood Drive. Obviously, they knew he was going to be a tag team with his brother Rick. He was about 185 pounds back then, but just chiseled, very cut. They both had that wrestling background. Dusty said he wanted to get a look at him, and they asked me to go in the ring with him. Said, go out there, give me about 5 or 6 minutes. No TV. We're just going to take a look at him. And he clotheslined me right in the face. And I knew right away my nose was broken. It had happened 7 times. After a while, as soon as you get hit, you're like, oh, yeah, there's another one. But it pissed me off. I'm like, dude, relax. And so we're going back and forth, and I just jumped and drop kicked him. I was trying to give him a bloody nose. But, Dusty said, you got to get a little more experience, go down to Memphis. And obviously he said put on some weight, but I think he took the weight part more personally because ever since then, when he came back, he was huge, and he's always been huge. But excellent worker. He was really green at that time. They just want to take a look at him. But man, I tell you what, that was probably the hardest hit I ever took on my nose. He just right laid into it.
You had a house show run in 91 with Stunning Steve Austin, obviously, showing the confidence the company had in you. What do you recall from those matches, and did you see, the potential there for one of the greatest of all time?
Oh gosh, yeah, we knew right away when he first got there. His motor was always on, and when he was in the ring, he was going. He was just there. He had that it factor. When he got in the ring, you could just tell. It's like a light switch go off. But he was also fun to work with because he'd do all kinds of goofy stuff in house matches. Angel, you see the chick in the 7th row? She's got big tits. Like, I didn't see her. There she is, right there. Look, show 'em, honey. And so he just made fun on the road. But so great to work with. I mean, he was crisp. Everything he did looked real. He's a great guy. He deserves all the success he has as well. I think the office knew, everybody knew that he was going to be one of the top guys of all time. I mean, he had it.
And you also wrestled him in a tag with Brian Pillman as the Hollywood Blondes. Those matches looked fun to be involved in as well.
Yeah, gosh, Brian was such a good worker too. But they had that, the Hollywood gimmick thing, and they both had that fake arrogance that people hated them. It was fun to watch because as heels, you're being a babyface when they're walking in the ring on TV. You're just standing there. You're out of the camera view and just watching the reaction of people and stuff they did with them. It was so funny, but they would truly get heat, and it wasn't cheap heat.
Oh, love the puns. Tommy, what's the worst injury that you've ever gotten in wrestling? And we're at 2023 now. How is the body these days from all the years of work in the ring?
Ooh. Well, I was very fortunate. I didn't have any broken bones, or other than 7 times my nose. I had that plastic surgery when I was afterwards. I had 2 sinoplasties and 2 septoplasties to fix it, but breathing wise. But between the 4 years in the military and the 8 years in the wrestling business, I'm now 60, and I feel like I'm an 80-year-old. I got degenerative arthritis in my back, neck, knees, and ankles. So it's I move a little slower these days.
Yeah.
In 90, this is maybe a deep cut as well, but in 92, you worked a couple of, or I guess it was a single taping, maybe I'm wrong, for Herb Abrams' UWF, where you wrestled Paul Orndorff and Barry Horowitz. Just wondering why you never continued with that company. Did you ever get to meet the legendary character Herb Abrams?
Yeah, Nelson helped set that up, and he just, we always took his advice where he'd lead us. We always knew he had our best interest at heart. I just remember thinking, it just kind of a one and done shot. I want to say they were both, those matches were on the same day. So I remember working those guys. Paul was awesome to work with. Same way, if he trusted you, he'd give you a lot, but as soon as you slow down, he'd eat you up. He'll tell you. But we were introduced to her, but didn't have any real interaction with him talking about advice from Nelson. When he started his own Atlantic Coast Wrestling, a regional TV product, I was finally just starting to work house shows for WWF. He said, "Son, if we do this, I'm going to give you a push. I'm going to make you one of our main guys. I'm going to ask you to not go back to WWF, put guys over." I said, "Even on house shows?" He said, "Yeah." So I struggled with that, but I knew Nelson had my best interest at heart. But it was always one of those. I still went back a few times after that to WWF, but I have no regrets.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Tommy, in terms of modern day, do you watch the business? If so, what do you watch? What do you like about it now, or what do you not like about it now?
I honestly don't. I knew that Undertaker recently just finally got out of the business because I remember I had his first TV match, so I've kind of followed him, and Shawn Michaels as well. He went out a few years ago, but those 2 guys were in it when I was in it, so they were multi-generation as far as their lives on television. 15 Minutes of Fame didn't apply to them. They were 20, 30 years of being top guys, so every generation of fans were a part of that. I was very excited, so I watched them. But nowadays, what's on TV to me is unwatchable. It's just nothing of what we were taught, the psychology of the business, good versus evil. These matches now, for me, is this, they're one finishing move after another, and their finishing moves don't mean anything. It's just boom, 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 boom. Back when we were taught, the house shows back then would go 30, 40 minutes, and Gene Anderson was from the old school. You work an arm for 40 minutes and just get heat. Babyface comes back and wins. So I don't watch it, honestly, but it's not to take away the guys that are working this business now, and the girls. They are very, they're great athletes. They've got great bodies. They can do all kinds of crazy moves, but it's just not what I was taught. You know, when you go into an arena that's got 20,000 people and you can feel the emotion going up and down based on what you're doing, it's like an orchestra. You're pulling emotions out of these people. You're getting them involved. I saw Rock and Roll Express, probably the greatest baby tag team there was, with girls crying when they thought they were dying. And you know, and Ole Anderson got stabbed in Greenville, South Carolina, where I live now, at a match. You know, a guy was that mad at him. You know, caught him, I think, in his back or something. But I mean, that's, to me, that's the business. You know, when you draw people into what you're doing, and then when you walk back through the curtains, you know, you're back to, you know, now I'm just Tommy Barrett. I missed that high, and I think that's where a lot of those guys were trying to replace that feeling with drugs, alcohol, and sex. So that was the kind of the wake-up call for me, as far as you know, all these guys, a lot of these guys we talked about have passed away, you know, most of them in the same manner, and that was heartbreaking for me. So at 31, my father committed suicide in '94. And then that's, you know, I just looking back at all the guys that I knew that had already died, my heart just wasn't in it. My hairline was going, TV ratings were going down. It just wasn't as big as when I got in '86, and that's when I decided to walk away from the business. So just the stuff you don't hear about backstage and see and live, you know, it's just, it was a lot. But, you know, I had a great 8-year run. I don't have any regrets. So I wanted to be on top, but it just didn't work out that way.
What are your thoughts on the way that the modern business, I guess, beginning with you know, the emphasis on moving wrestling away from a, you know, a live event product to a television product, moved away from the use of enhancement guys that those of us who grew up in that time frame, you know, recall and see such value in the business at that time of the role of the enhancement guy. Do you think that is something that can ever come back again? And secondly, do you think it's time that some of the enhancement individuals are recognized in a Hall of Fame capacity?
I'd love to see some of our guys that, from my level, to get some kind of head nod. You know, people like Arn Anderson and Jim Cornette, who give me mentions on their podcasts here and there, is more than enough satisfaction for me. But to do something at that level, I would think so. For the going back to the house shows, it was really cool because if you watch the Superstation shows, you know, and their breaks, they do coming up in next week. They'd give all the dates and all the southern towns they'd be in. But you know, and it was the television matches that they had were working angles. So if you want to see what happens with Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes, be in this town, be in this town, be in this town. So it drove people to these, to these buildings. They'd sell out everywhere they went. It was just how it was. It was a well-oiled machine, and the house shows were so more intimate. The matches were longer. There was opportunities to meet some of the guys. So I think that's part of the business. Was the heartbeat of the fans. They loved those events. But now there's more money because they're doing pay-per-views, they're doing television. You're talking about sponsorships, you're talking about commercials, you're talking about all the, even back then, the reason they created our class was because the ratings were down. They knew ratings and revenue go together, so that they brought on the enhancement talent. So just to give it that push to, you know, get sponsors back. TV, because even back in the NWA, they had like the Orange Crush Slam of the Week or whatever. Just they'd tie in a sponsor with a slam, and I think I got one of the Orange Crush ones when I was being body slammed by somebody. So, oh look, they did it.
And when you left the business, Tommy, was that a clean break after 8 years wrestling? Do you keep in contact with anyone? Did you ever take up any training for younger guys or anything like that, or did you just kind of freeze completely out of it?
That was it for me. I was living in Charlotte still, but I called both offices and said, you know, I've decided I'm not going to work anymore. I appreciate all the work you've given me over the years. I wasn't anybody. I was just one of their enhancement talents. I said, and they said, you sure? I said, absolutely. So it was very unceremonious, very uneventful. But I didn't look back. I was my father and I never got along. That's why I moved out at 17 to go in the military. He was a military guy as well. But when I came back from basic training, it was the first time in my life he and I had something in common. So I was building on that relationship, and we got much closer. So when he died by suicide, it really hit me hard because I was the one calling home. I was just checking on him, and the detective answered the phone. He's like, I said, he said, "Who's this?" I said, "My name's Tom. Who's this?" And said, "This is Detective so-and-so." And my heart stopped. And I said, why are you at my father's house? And he said, your father's deceased. And he told me why. And so I had to call my 4 siblings and my mom and let them know. But my heart just sank. And, I was already, like I said, my career felt like the 15 minutes were already evaporated. So I just was ready to try something new. And at that time, they were advertising at a local broadcasting school in Charlotte. So I went to that. And just as I Forrest Gumped my way into the wrestling business, about 4 months of the training there, I ended up at the biggest rock station in North Carolina that had a morning show with 138 affiliates. So I wanted to stay in the entertainment business and not get a real job. So I just very fortunate to land there. So I haven't looked back since.
Can you talk a bit about the important ministry work that you've been doing with Scott Simpson, Nikita Koloff, and Lex Luger?
Absolutely. Nick was a mentor of mine. I saw him go through the loss of his first wife, Mandy. She died of Hodgkin's disease, Hodgkin's lymphoma, and the change he had. So he got out of the business at the end of '93 when I was at the beginning of '94. But he already was working his way to go towards ministry. They had a men's event a few years after that. For my life, it was obviously my father committed suicide. Then I finally got married. Met my wife in the radio business. Our first child, a daughter, she passed away. So that was another one of the things God was doing to get my attention. Then in 2008, I had already gotten out of the radio business to go into nonprofit. So around 2006, I had a son was born, Chris. He's 17 now, but I went to nonprofit. In 2008, the economy collapsed, and I was working at a nonprofit. It was like a slow-moving train. As an executive, you keep your frontline workers, the people who work with the children, in place. So I was out of work first time in my life, and I was the breadwinner. So we had to file bankruptcy, short sell our home. So all these things just happened in my life. And then my wife was, as a newlywed, pretty much. Only married like 3 years, kind of disenchanted with this guy that all of a sudden has no job, can't find a job. So. And Nikita called and he said, "Look, we have this men's event coming up. It's 5 days, and I think you need it. You'll enjoy it." And it was. I surrendered my heart to Jesus Christ there, and my life just blossomed and changed dramatically. But him and Lex became partners and started their own ministry. It's called Man Camp. It's a 5-day event for men, and it's mancamp.info, I believe. But I tell everybody I know that if you want your life changed, transformed, turned upside down, go to this camp. Every man needs to know this. It's about being spiritually healthy, physically healthy, and it's great. So I see them. They do their camp down in Georgia. I see them probably twice a year, April and October. They do their camps, and as an alumni, I go down on a Thursday evening of that week and help serve food to the men that are getting ready to graduate. And it's life changing when you see a group of men's lives. The look on their face when their lives are changed because of Jesus Christ, it is amazing. And Lex, when you hear his testimony, it's just as powerful. And he'll tell you, I was the most arrogant guy there was. And Nikita always gives him a hard time about it too. But they're 2 great men doing great work, and their lives are changing. They still get booked for autograph signings, but they incorporate their ministry into that, and it's just wonderful to see.
There is a lot of good in the wrestling business when you talk about those 2 guys, and a guy like DDP as well that does different work with people, like he done with Buff Bagwell and various different people. So as much as the wrestling business and all these dark side of the rings come out and there's all negativity surrounding it, there is a good side to the business as well, and it's nice to hear those stories.
Absolutely. That's the joke now, is like you either die or you find Jesus Christ. So that's the inside with the boys. That's the saying. You must be one of the ones that found Jesus. But yeah, Diamond Dallas Page is doing great work. He's I haven't had a chance to talk to him, but I follow him on his social media sites, and it looks like he's doing great work for people. And he's an awesome fellow. He's so cool.
So, Tommy, where can the fans keep up with you on social media? Do you have any appearances or anything you'd like to promote at this time?
No, I go by my real name on Facebook. It's Tommy Barrett, Barrett. My father's side of the family, Barrett, originate out of County Cork over in Ireland.
I was thinking that a nice Irish name. That's what I said. I'm in Kilkenny. I'm in Kilkenny. We're us and Cork. We're enemies with the hurling. Do you know that game with the sticks?
Yeah, yeah.
We're enemies, but I won't hold it against you.
I forgive you, brother.
Well, we'll encourage the fans to follow you there, and wanted to thank you for coming on the show tonight. Definitely very interesting career, and it's nice that you have such a positive story. As Maurice said, we often hear about the negative, but it's nice to hear about some of the positive for a change. So once again, thank you very much for coming on.
Very welcome. And if you guys ever need an extra guest to fill in, call me. I'd be glad to talk more about it. I know we get kind of glossed over a lot of stuff, but I love sharing stories about where I was and where I am now. I'm currently in the beer business, by the way.
Oh,
Wow.
let's talk about that. That's the Irishman in you coming out.
Yeah, I could drink a pint with you.
Well, we'll most definitely keep in touch and have you back, and we'll maybe the next one we can collectively over the interwebs here have a pint.
Absolutely.
Great
Thank you so
idea.
much, fellas. I appreciate it.
Fans,
Thanks, Tommy.
that's it for this edition of the Cheap Heat Productions Wrestling Podcast. For Maurice and Tommy, take care, everybody, and see you next time.